old one. And the new replacement. I missed pointing out the left side turbo sitting up here. IPD plenum. The two oil coolers and water coolers are here. They just stack on the back of the engine. Thermostat housing, gasket, there's a new one in that box. Secondary water pump. Just waiting for this hose to come in, and then I can seal this up. I'm going to go through and inventory all my O-rings, replace these 3 O-rings, and this piece should be able to go back on with some Dre Bond, just a gasket sealer. Went ahead and took all the pins out because I didn't like the way they were sticking too far into the water passage. So I'm getting, instead of 10 millimeter pins, I'm going to get 6 millimeters, which are shorter. The only one I left in was this short one here, but I went ahead and pulled that out anyway so I can put some JB weld over the pin after it's all done. It seems to be what the shops are doing these days, so they'll pin them, use the red Loctite, and then after the Loctite's set up, I'll just put a drop of JB weld and encapsulate the bolt head onto the actual coolant manifold. I think that's everything. Heat shield, a bunch of turbo lines, all of these O-rings are getting replaced. And fancy work light. Give you a tour of the inside while I got this thing running. That flex disc is going to come off. I got that on the ground there. I just sprayed down those bolts with some PV Blaster. PV Blaster is there. Here's the other side of the engine. And another place where the transmission shouldn't go is in the front of the car, but it should all be resolved pretty soon. I want to reattach the transmission as soon as I get that flywheel lock tool and assemble the pressure plate, clutch, and that whole assembly. Some fancy joker wrenches, and I got a little bolt sizing tool here, even though the manual kind of calls them all out. While I'm waiting for the timing plates and some parts from Porsche, went ahead and cleaned up the valve cover. Toughest thing is getting all this old gasket material off. Tried chasing it with just a little polishing wheel, but I'm afraid of doing any damage to the aluminum, so I'm probably just going to resort back to the acetone and elbow grease. I've got some paint stripper that I've sprayed on there that kind of gets it in the jelly form. So I scrape most of it off. I've got a plastic razor blade as well as some plastic scraping tools that I use in conjunction just to get the heavy material off, and then just go back and force it off or work it off with the acetone and a bunch of lint-free rags. I'm going to attempt to change the water pump. This one probably shouldn't sound like this. Take a look at the new one. Okay, so the new one comes with a gasket. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and remove the hose. Alright, I managed to get the hose off without damaging it. Looks like there's a pry point back here. Now, don't look like any of the blades are damaged. Alright, that's the sound. And let's compare it to the new one. Obviously this one is completely silent. Here's the two back to back. Alright, I'm going to go check the torque specs for the new gasket, clean the surfaces off, and go ahead and put this back together. I'm going to be guessing and say it's 7.5 foot-pounds, but I'll just double check that. Alright, went ahead and cleaned off the surfaces with a lint-free towel and some brake clean. Okay. Went through, but there's two longer bolts. This here, 12 in essentially 6 o'clock position if you're looking at it with this as your north and south. The torque spec is 7.5 foot-pounds, so I'm going to go ahead and cinch these up and then torque them down. I verified that the gaskets do not need to be cut. In the manual there's a version of this having a cutaway, but that's not the case with this version. So I actually took it off before I torqued it to verify it wasn't the gasket you have to cut. Okay, this is already set to 90 inch-pounds. So 3, 4, 5, 6. Go around and check them all, but that's it. Alright, I just replaced the thermostat, old versus the new. This thing is pretty damn tough to get out. Ended up wedging it in the corner of this parts cart, pushing down with my thumb, pushing down here with the other side on the screwdriver, and while applying even force, you rotate this plate till it snaps into the two little grooves that are here. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt this back up to the this coolant manifold that also houses the water pump. Alright, I'm going to install the thermostat housing. Went ahead and cleaned off the surface with a light scuff pad. New gaskets on. This inside fitting was full of corrosion, so I went ahead and Use a little bit of degreaser and the scrub pad to also clean that out. You take a wild ass guess that these bolts are also 7.5 foot-pounds. Seems to be a common trend. Valve cover gasket, which is not really a gasket, it's just a torque spec. You're going to use a valve cover sealer. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and cut the video off here. I'm just going to torque these down to 7.5. But if you wanted to see this thing complete, pinned, these are new BBI fittings, drilled and tapped. I've also epoxied in the pins. I doubt they'll back out, but it's there now. So one more piece of insurance, I guess. It's the end of Saturday, April 11th. Today was a productive day. The valve covers are on. Before that, torqued down the saddles that hold the camshafts. Replaced the O-ring on this guy here. Got the sprocket covers. Secondary oil pumps are on. Actually, these are the primary oil pumps. Same thing on this side. Valve covers torqued down. Got this pulley manifold dialed in. Torqued these down to 48 foot-pounds. Got these two pipes tied in. Hose connecting that to this back manifold is in. That bottom manifold is essentially held in by 4 bolts. That's also been put in with that special dry bond silicone. Transmission's been reattached. Had some struggles with that this morning. Took 4 attempts. Finally we figured out that can't really manhandle this thing in there. It's essentially got to line up perfectly and just kind of slide in. What was happening before is the clutch forks has these 2 plastic bushings that hang off the edge of it. We were probably coming in a little bit off center and catching the plastic bushing on this end. That's on the clutch fork, and that was getting mangled. So the last 3 times we took it off was to address the issue with that bushing. Finally we got that solved and got the clutch pin in. Got it in on the first try. You can rotate this shaft as long as the transmission's in neutral to line up the spline with the clutch plate. You can also see the new caps are in. All these bolts have been torqued down to 7.5 foot-pounds. Tomorrow I'll get the oil coolers put on and get the spark plugs and the coil packs, which are here, put back in. I got a bunch of coolant hoses to change out. Those essentially are for the heater system. There's a heater pipe that goes here. I'll show you that tomorrow. But glad things have gotten this far. It's going to be closing it up pretty soon. Saturday, April 18th in the morning. Got everything assembled last night. Pressure tested everything. This morning was just some final cleaning and double and triple checking the work. Tightened up the O2 sensors. Those seem to have backed themselves free.
2 there.
Okay, we're good. Shut it down.